Hey, welcome back to another video in this Linux crash course. In this video, we're going to talk about users and permissions. We're going to deep dive into groups, users, sudo, file permissions, and all that stuff. So let's get at it. And if you're following along in this video series, all of this content is in the GitHub repo, archriven/linux-crash-course. We are in chapter 5 on users and permissions. So you can see a lot of content here. I'm not going to read this back to you. I'm going to let you read this on your own, but I will spend just a moment here talking about the different types of users. Generally, there's 3 different types of users. There is kind of something called a root user, which is the very first user that's ever installed on that system. They generally have the most access. That user has access to everything in the whole system. Then you have regular users, and you try to limit the access that regular users have. If you are kind of setting up a Linux box and you want regular users to be able to log in and access that box, you want to constrain what they can do. So you don't want to just give them freedom to do everything. The general rule is minimum permissions needed to do what they need to get done. And the third type of user are system users. These are special kind of users that run processes. Like, for example, when you have Nginx, like a web proxy installed, Nginx has a user that does all the processes for Nginx, and that is a service user. So let's go ahead and get into the terminal and try some commands out. So the first thing we're going to do is I want to be able to list all the existing users. And so the command to do that is there's a get ent or get entries command, and we want to get the entries that are in the password file. So when I run this command, you're going to see a lot of users. Here's the user that we currently are running under. It's Ubuntu. So this user's ID is 1000. The group that it's in is 1000 also. You can see that the home directory for this user is home/Ubuntu, and you can also see that the default shell is /bin/bash. That's the bash shell. And if you scroll up, you can see a lot of other users. And again, these are mostly system users at this point. But if we go to the very top, you can see that very first user. That's the root user. It also has a user ID of 0, has a group ID of 0, and its home directory is on /root, and it has a default shell of bin/bash. Most of these other users are mostly service users. So you can see like www-data. So www-data is generally used for kind of web servers, but we're going to create our own users now. We're going to learn how to add our own users. So we're going to clear this out, and we're just going to create some demo users. So for example, if I want to add a user, if I type in user add, and I'm going to -m because that option allows you to create a home directory for this user. And then we're going to do one more option, which is -s, and that's going to set the default shell. If you don't set the default shell to bash, it's going to just be the kind of normal shell. And so we want to set that if we want to use bash. And then we would put the name. Now this isn't going to work yet because, as you can imagine, creating a user should be something where you need elevated privileges to do that. Ubuntu does have those elevated privileges, but the default state that we're just running commands in is non-elevated state. So if I want to elevate to the administrative state, I need to run that same command, but I prefix it with sudo. So I'm going to run the same thing again. That should work. So now if I do my get entries, the password, I'm going to see down here I have another user called demo. And you can see incremented user ID is 1001. The group ID is 1001, and its default is bin bash. Okay, so we've got a new user. Now, if you noticed during that process, it never asked me for a password at all. So under the hood, I'm not sure exactly what Ubuntu is setting the password to. Maybe it's not setting it at all, but at this point, I don't know the password. And if that user was a real person, I couldn't tell them really how to log in. Now, normally, to access a remote server, you would have to set them up with SSH access. We're not going to go through that in this lesson. That'll be a different lesson. But I want to be able to at least allow them to log in. So we're going to set a password for this user. We're going to elevate our privileges to an admin, and we're going to run the passwd password command on that new user demo. And then it's going to ask me what the new password is, and I'm just going to type in secret and retype it in secret again. And so now I've successfully updated and set the password for this particular user. All right, so a couple of other little things here. We've already covered get entries in the password, and this was quite verbose. A lot of entries in here. If I'm just looking for one specific user, I can put on the end, I can type the user that I'm looking for, demo. And now I just get the entry for just the demo. If I wanted to get rid of all of this stuff and just get the username, which is on that side over there, I can use a little bit of magic or the piping commands that we've talked about before, and we can use this command. So get password. I'm going to pipe that into the awk awk command -f. We are going to print. Guess we're going to use that, and we're going to run this command here. What we're going to do is we're taking the output from the password command, get intent password, and we're going to pipe that into the awk command. Awk it's an acronym based upon the three people that created the command. I think most people just call it awk. And these are some of the parameters we're passing in. For now, we're just going to run this, and now you can see it kind of stripped all that off, and you can see just the usernames. One thing I want to show is the home directory now. So if I list what's around the home directory, you're going to see two directories, one for the Ubuntu user and one for the demo user. And then the other thing you can see is when we talk about permissions, we've talked about permissions and ownership before. This column is who is the owner, and you can see the demo user owns the demo directory. And then there's this group. By default, when we created a new demo user, Linux actually created a group called demo at the same time. When we start to look at groups in just a moment, we can see who else is all members of that group. And right now it's just going to be one single demo user. But permission wise, I'm logged in as of the Ubuntu user. If I were to come in and try to see some of the content in the demo user's directory, I should get permission denied, right? So that's the demo user's home directory. That's not generally accessible by me. Now, of course, my user Ubuntu has administrative privileges, so I could sudo lsla, and then I could probably get in here and see the content of that demo user's directory, just because I'm an administrator and I can elevate my privileges. But most users will not be able to do that. Everybody's home directory is their own home directory, and that's their content. So while we still have this demo user, I want to switch over to use that demo user account. So you can see right now I'm using the Ubuntu user. One of the ways I can do that is we can do an su command, and I put a dash because dash is going to start a brand new shell session with this user, and then I'm going to type in the user I want to switch to. So switch users, su, dash means I want to get a new session going, and the user I want to start the session with. Here it's going to ask me for the password that I typed in previously. So I'm going to type in that password, secret, and now I'm logged in as the demo user. And if I print my working directory, I logged in and I dropped into my own home directory. I have full access to this. I can see all of my hidden files here, the dot files. I can also go back and look and see what's all in the home directory. I can see the Ubuntu user. So I cannot access that Ubuntu user's directory, permission denied. And in addition, I cannot elevate because this is not a sudo user. That command to be able to access the Ubuntu user. So it asks me for my password. I'll type the password in, and it says, hey, this user is not a member of the sudoers file. So I don't have access. I'm not an admin. When I'm done with this session, I can type in the exit command, and I'm going to exit back out to the Ubuntu session that I started this with. So if you remember at the very top, I started an Ubuntu session, I switched user, and I started a new session for the demo user. And all of this was under the demo user session. And when I logged out, I dropped back into the session that I used to create the demo user session with. Now the last time we logged in using this, and that's perfectly fine, but the Ubuntu user may not know the password for the demo user. And in that case, because we are an admin, we can sudo and we can type that same command, and it will not ask me for a password. And I can automatically switch and start a session with that user's account. Everything I do from this point forward, it's as if I was logged in as that user, because I really am. And then when I'm done doing what I want to do, I exit and I'm dropping back into my Ubuntu user's account. So for the purpose of being able to show you how to delete a user, I'm going to spin up a new user also. So we're going to create another user. and we're going to sudo user add, and -m means I would like you to create a home directory. -s is I'm going to set the shell, the default shell, and this is going to be demo2 user, and we're going to hit enter here. I'm not going to set a password, just don't need it, but if I look at now the home directory, you should see a new directory for demo2. So here's the Ubuntu one, here's the demo one that we were just playing around with, and here's demo2. Okay, so now there's a couple of scenarios. Let's say demo2 is, maybe it's a user and they're gone for 6 months. And so what we want to do is, while they're gone, we want to disable their account. Okay, so let's take a look at how we would do that. I can use the sudo and then password command again. And then what we're going to do is we're going to feed it a -l attribute, and then we're going to tell it demo2 user. And so when I run this, it's going to change the password to something that they no longer know. Now, if they were to come in and maybe try to switch users to demo2, it's going to ask for a password, but their old password is no longer valid. So I don't know what it is anymore. It'll take them through the process, and then authentication is going to eventually fail, and they will not be able to log in. Then when they return, what I can do as the admin is I can come back in and I can use the password command one more time, and I can reset the password for the demo2 user. And it's going to ask me for what I want to use the password. I'm going to set it to something, and now the password's been changed. And then when they decide they want to come back in and they're going to log in as the demo2 user, that user, then I can type in the password and they can access the machine again. We have these 3 users. At this point, we've decided that we're going to actually delete this user. How do we do that? And there's a command for that. Again, we'll have to elevate our privileges. I'm running it under Ubuntu again. From here, I'm going to user del, delete. There is a flag here, -r, and that flag is going to tell it to remove the home directory when you're deleting this user. So we're going to clean up, not just leave that home directory kind of straggled there. And I'm going to hit enter here. So it's giving me some warning here about how it didn't find this /var/mail/demo2. You can ignore that. But if I look at the home directory now, demo2 is gone. And if I get entries in the password and I look for something like a demo star, I guess demo2, I don't see demo2, but I still see the old demo. Okay, so we can see that. Okay, let's talk about groups. When you're an administrator and you're trying to lock access down to certain files, it's a lot more efficient to administer groups as opposed to individual users. And that's why groups are important. You can create a lot of different groups, and we'll go through a practical example towards the end, and I'll show you how to do that. But for now, let's just exercise how we would create a group. Let's talk about how we get a list of groups. We're going to use our get entries command again, and I always want to say intent. I don't know why I want to say intent, but get entries, and we're going to apply that to the group. And what we're going to see is a list of all the groups. And we can see, like we talked about earlier, when we created a user called demo, Linux actually created a group called demo also. So you can see that's the demo group. Here's the Ubuntu group. There's a bunch of other groups in here that you can see that were created for us automatically by the system. And we'll go all the way back to, here's the root user and the root group. If I want to see what groups a particular user belongs to, I can use the groups command, and then I can feed it a particular user. So what groups does Ubuntu belong to? So Ubuntu belongs to the Ubuntu group, the ADM group, presumably that's admin, the CD-ROM group, the Sudo group, the DIP group, and the LXD group. If you want to look at all the groups that, say, root belongs to, you can see it belongs to just the root group. All the groups that our demo user belongs to, just the demo group so far. Okay, so that's how we can see what groups that particular users belong to. If I want to create a brand new group, we're just going to create a test group here. So we're going to use the sudo, so I need to elevate permission, and group add, test, and that's our test group right there. So when I hit enter, it's going to create a test group. So now if I go and list out the groups, you're going to see that at the very bottom. Here's my test group. Here's the group ID 1002, and so we can see that we have successfully created that new group. One of the other things you want to be able to do is you want to also be able to see, given a group, what members belong to that group. There is a command called members, but by default that's not installed on Ubuntu. So you want to install it, and you can install it with sudo apt install members. That will install the package for members. It's already done this on this machine, so it's not going to really do anything new. But now I have a members command, and I can say who all belongs to, for example, the Ubuntu group. And then it's going to say, well, just the Ubuntu user. But we can do things like who all belongs to that ADM group that we saw that Ubuntu belonged to. Okay, well, here's syslog and Ubuntu. So now we can ask, who's the members or who belongs to our new test group. And we should see that nobody belongs to that group. So now it's time for us to add people to that test group. To add a user to a test group, we have to modify the user. So there's a command. We're going to elevate ourselves, and it's user mod. And there's a couple of flags here. So -A and then capital G. And then we can put in the group name. In fact, we can have a list of groups here if we want. But for now, we're just going to say test group. And then we're going to apply this to a particular user. And we're going to apply this to our demo user. So we're going to add our test group to the demo user. So the demo user will become a member of that group. So hit enter, and now if I rerun members of the test group, you can see that our demo user is now a member of that test group. And vice versa, if I type in groups and I type demo, what groups do the demo user belong to? You can now see that it belongs to the demo group and it belongs to this test group. So we can go both ways. We can figure out, given a user, what groups it belongs to, and given a group, what users belong to it. And then the final thing I just want to do is let's just clean this up. We're just trying to go through an exercise of how do we create a group and add members. How we get rid of groups is we can run a group del command, group delete, and we just have to give it the group name that you want to delete. So we're going to enter here. And now if I were to get ent group, that group, which was at the bottom, is now gone. So we've been using this sudo command with our Ubuntu user to elevate the privileges of the Ubuntu user so it can access certain things that require that privilege. We can add other users to that sudo group. Sudo is just a group, and so it's pretty easy to add that. So let's go through the exercise of we're going to create a quick user, and then we're going to add that user to the sudo group. So go through the add user again, ms bin bash. And the user we're going to create is just, we'll call it the boss. And so now if I look in the home directory, I should see the boss here. I still have my demo user. We're going to leave that for later, and the Ubuntu user. I'm going to set a password for the boss. And we're just going to put secret in. Repeat that. So I've set the password for the boss. And then I'm going to switch to the boss user. And now I dropped into the boss user. If I print the working directory, I should see that I'm in the home directory for the boss. And what I want to do is I want to look at the root directory. I'm going to switch the root directory and I'm going to list this out because I'm trying to get to a point where I need certain privilege to gain access to something. And so I'm going to come up through here, and here is a folder where I do not have access to this directory called root. In fact, that's the root user's home directory. It's partitioned off, only the root user has access to it. But if I were to sudo, I can sudo and then run as the root user. So let's try and see if we can access this. So we're going to try ls-la, and we're going to try to just, first of all, list it. And it should give me permission denied, and it does. And now I'm going to try sudo ls-la, and it's going to ask me for the password. And surprise, it's going to tell me I'm not part of the sudoers file. So that's what we're going to work on next. I'm going to exit this boss session. So now I'm back in the Ubuntu user. Clear this out. And what I want to do is I want to add the boss user to the sudo group. We're going to add sudo to that user. So we're going to do the same thing we did before. User mod -A capital G. There is a sudo group, and I want to add that to the boss. And after I enter this command, the boss will then have sudo privileges. So we're going to see that here now. If I go through that same exercise I did before, I log back in as the boss, we're going to see it give us a little indicator here. Now, we didn't see this before, but now it's saying, hey, you can run commands as an administrator. You just have to prefix it with sudo. And that's what we're going to try next. If I sudo and try to list out that root directory, oops, it's not going to work. I didn't give a command. So try that again. So I sudo ls-la on that root directory. It's going to ask me for my password. and I get to list the root directory. And the reason that worked now is because I was successfully able to elevate my position as the administrator, and I'm running things as root, and then I can see what's in the root directory. One thing that we had to do is we had to enter a password here for sudo access. And that's not a bad thing. When we do this as Ubuntu, so if I exit out of here, I type in sudo ls-la root as the Ubuntu user, and I hit enter, it doesn't force me to enter a password. And that's because the Ubuntu user is set up so it can access this thing without a password. I'm going to show you how that's done. I'm not going to set this user up like that, but I'll just show you where, if you wanted to, you can make those changes. So if we type in a command sudo visudo, so visudo, and hit enter, and we scroll to the very bottom of this. First of all, we're in Nano. If you don't know, Nano is a text editor. It's pretty easy to use, but we're going to scroll all the way down to the bottom here. And you can start to see things like, here's a user privilege. Root has all privileges, admin, sudo, and then it includes this sudoers.d, and this is a directory, so it includes everything in this directory. So I'm going to exit out. Let's go look at what's in that directory. Probably have to sudo, so let's go in sudo right away. And it's a .d directory. That's right. So if you do as a sudo, you don't necessarily have access to your alias there. And now you can see in here there's a 90-cloud-init-users and there's a readme file. So I am just going to, let's take a cat at and see if we can see what's in. First of all, that readme file. So it has some information about what this directory is, and it talks about how by default this directory is included, and there's a bit more information. I'm not going to read it, but I also want to cat out that other file, which was the 90-cloud-init-users, and let's see what's in here. Here's where I started from. Sudo cat cloud init. You can see it has a couple of comments, but this is the command right here. This entry is what allows the Ubuntu user to log in as sudo with no password. You could copy and paste this file and change the word Ubuntu, the user Ubuntu, to the boss, and then the boss would not need a password anymore when it had to use sudo either. I'm not going to do that. I think that's a pretty trivial exercise at this point, and it's kind of questionable if maybe that is the recommended best practice. So we'll just leave it the way it is for now. And what I will do is I want to go in and just go ahead and clean these users up. So if I see what's in my home directory, I have the boss. I'm going to get rid of that user del, delete the home directory of the boss, and that directory should now be gone, and that user should be gone also. And I don't think I'm going to use this demo user anymore either. We are going to go ahead and just clean that one up also. Okay, so let's do a practical example. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a directory structure that has directories in it that are supposed to be accessible by certain groups of people. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to go to the root directory, and in the root directory we're going to create a new directory called, and I'm just going to call Z files because I know it will end up in the end. So when I list, it'll be always down here at the very bottom. So there's my new directory called Z files. Right now, it's created by the root user. It's owned by the root group. So I'm going to go ahead and switch into that directory, and I'm going to create a couple of new directories also. So we're going to go ahead and create a public directory. We're going to go ahead and create a directory for, like, say, leads, maybe leads or managers, but we'll just call them leads. And we're going to create a directory for, say, owners. And so if I have content now, the stuff that's in the owners should be accessible by owners and not by everybody else. There's a public directory that should have content in there that's accessible by everybody. And then I have a leads directory that should be only accessible by my leads or my managers. So before we leave this, I'm going to go ahead and create a couple of files, one file in each one here, just so that we have some content. I'm going to use Nano for that, the leads, and we'll just create a file in leads. This is accessible by leads. Go and get out of there. I trapped myself. I needed to do sudo before I did this. I'm not going to be able to save the buffer. I'm going to go back in and try one more time as leads file. So I've sudoed it now. leads, exit, save it. I'm gonna create a file that is for owners. Theoretically, this file is, owner info. We're gonna go ahead and get out of here, save that, and we're gonna create one more file in the public directory. Everyone. All right, so I've got 3 files. So if I tree, you can see I've got leads, I got a file, owners got a file, and public has got a file. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create 3 users. We are going to just spin them up really quick. We've already done this a couple of times, so we're going to add a new user m-s, set the default shell to bash. This user is going to be called Bob. That will be my owner. I'm going to do the same thing, and I'm going to create another user called Sue, and this will be my lead. And I'm going to create another user called Tom, and this is not an owner and not a lead. It's just someone that should be able to access that public directory. And if we sit and think about now the access control, how are we going to control access to this file? So I have these files. I have these 3 users, Bob, Sue, and Tom. I want Bob to have access to, because he's going to be the owner. He's going to have access to the owner's directory. He's also going to have access to the leads directory, and he's also going to have access to the public directory. So Bob's going to get access to all 3 of those directories. Sue will get access to the leads directory. She will not have access to the owner's directory, but she will have access to the public. So she's going to get access to leads and public. And Tom will not get access to leads or owners, but will have access to the public directory. That's where I want to end up. And how we're going to control this is we're going to create some groups now, and we're going to name these groups leads, owners, and public. And then we're going to add those groups to the different users. Let's go ahead through this exercise here. I'm going to add a group called public. We're going to add another group called leads. We're going to add a final group called owners. And next thing I need to do is now I need to assign these groups to the different people. And so we're going to assign stuff to Bob first. So we're user mod -a-g. Now I talked earlier about how you can have a little list in here. So Bob is going to be a member of the owners, comma. He's also a member of the leads, comma, and he's also going to have access to the public. And that's going to be our user Bob. And we're going to set up Sue also over here. She's going to have access to leads and public, and that will be Sue. And for now, I'm not going to do anything with Tom. I'm just going to leave Tom alone, and I know that Tom's not going to have access to that, but I want to show that someone who doesn't have these groups will not be able to access anything. Then we'll add Tom into the public and show that he can access the public group. Okay, so let me clear this out, and I'm going to list everything. So you can see that all of these directories were created or owned by the root user. And the root user has RWX privileges on all of them. So RWX means read, write, and execute. So that's the root user. They can come in and do anything they want in here. Anyone in the root group, which at this point is only the root user, has R-X. So read, no write, but they can execute files. And everybody else right now has R-X. So that means anybody in the system right now could come in and access this information. We need to change these permissions just a bit. We're going to go ahead and step out one directory. I'm as the Ubuntu user right now. I'm going to have to sudo, so elevate myself a little bit, and we're going to change the permissions. And I'm going to do this recursively because I'm going to start with the Z files, and I want it to go down and everything in here to set these permissions. And we're going to scroll real quick just to refamiliarize yourself. We've done this in the past, but read, write, and execute permissions here. So, RWX, read, write, execute. You can set it 2 ways. There's a numerical method and there's a symbolic method. We're going to use the numerical method right now, where 4 is a read, 2 is a write, and 1 is an execute. If you want one of the groups, like the owner, to have read, write, and execute, the first digit is a 7. Here, this 5 digit means that they have access to the 4 and the 1, so they can read and execute. We're going to come back over here, and we're going to keep the owner as a 7 because we want them to be able to read, write, and execute. The group, now the group right now is all root. Eventually, the group will be something different. But for now, we're going to say the group has access to rewrite and execute. And then everybody else, we're not going to give them any access at all. That's what I'm going to do with this z underscore files, and it's going to recursive. And if I list out now, you can see z files has rwx dash dash dash. So even Ubuntu, if I were to list z files, Ubuntu doesn't have permission. Now, obviously, Ubuntu has the elevation. You know, we can elevate the privileges to be able to list the files out. But without that elevation, without running sudo, even Ubuntu does not have access to this at this point. The next thing I want to do is let's take a look at the C files, and I want to set the group. So I want the leads group to own this leads directory, and I want the owners group to own this owners directory. So I want the groups associated with these directories to match up with those new groups that I just created. What we can do is we can sudo, because I'm going to need that for the elevation of the privileges, but we're going to change the group, and we're going to change the group, for example, lead. It's going to be called leads on the Z files and the leads directory. So if I hit enter here, and now I list my directory, now you can see how the leads group owns the leads directory. And we're going to repeat that process with owners. And one more time with public. Okay, so we're getting pretty close now. I have this leads directory. Its owner is roots, but anybody who belongs in the leads group should have RWX privilege to that directory. Same thing with owners. I have the owners directory. Anybody who belongs to the owners group should have the RWX privileges. So far, we are getting close to be able to access this. I'm going to show you the one problem, and it's important that we just kind of run into this problem, and then we'll remember this the next time. I'm going to sudo su, and I'm going to switch to the Bob user. Now, the Bob user is the user that has, and it belongs to all three of the groups. Automatically drops into their home directory, but we could switch over to the root directory, and I should be able to list, and I can see the Z files here. Now, the challenge that we're going to have right now is when I try to access Z files, let's see what happens here. So we're going to switch into Z files, and I'm going to get a permission denied. And the reason I get permission denied is you can see this directory, it's owned by root, and it's anybody who belongs to the root group can have access to it. And what I want to do is I want to set this group to the minimum level that you need access to this directory, which is our public group. So I'm going to exit out because Bob doesn't have sudo privileges, and we're going to take care of that now. We're going to sudo change group. Public is the minimum group that I want, and it's going to be on the Z files. And I'm not going to go recursive on this. I'm just going to set it on that directory itself. When I list this thing now, here's my Z files directory. The minimum group you have to belong to is the public group. Now, with that done, let's try and see if Bob can get access to everything now. So we sudo su, we're going to jump into a session with Bob, and we're going to switch directory into Z files. If I list everything here, I can see the three files. There's leads, there's owners and Bob, or public, and I want to see what's in the leads directory. So I can list out the leads directory, so I have access to that. There is going to be a problem here. I can see this coming up already. Is I don't think maybe I did a recursive when I changed the group, but I need to recursively change the group. So right now, this file is still owned by root. And what that is going to cause is if I try to access that file that's in their leads, it's going to give me permission here. So we're going to back out. Let's go ahead and fix that real quick. And the Ubuntu user is the only one that can fix these because it has the sudo privileges. Okay, so if I tree out Z files, I get these. My gut feeling is I need to recursively push those groups into all of this. So we're going to run this again. If I would have done a -R the first time, I wouldn't have to redo this. But we're going to run add the leads to z files / leads, that directory. I want to add recursively owners to z files / owners, and the group -R public to z files / public. This should clean up my permissions that I had before, so those issues. So let's go ahead and log back in as Bob. Let's see if they're gone now. I'm going to switch into my z files. I'm going to list out the files that are in the leads, and now you can see there's this file. It's owned by the leads group. Let's go ahead and cat that file out now, and you can see that Bob has access to that leads file. Let's go ahead and take a look at the owners directory. Bob should have access to the owners directory. There's a file in there that's owned by owners. So if I cat owners, that file out, Bob can see the owner info. And there's one more public directory. Let's see what's in there. There's one more file, and Bob should be able to access the file that's in the public directory. All right, so Bob is all set. We've got these permissions all set up and the group set up. Let's exit out for Bob. Let's go ahead and clear this out. Let's do the same thing and see what Sue can access. So sudo su-su. We have a session running as Sue. I'm going to switch over to the Z files, and I'm going to list. So Sue can list out everything that's in the main directory. She's going to list everything in the leads. She can. Can she access the leads file? She can access the leads file. She's going to try to access the owners directory. Permission denied. Can she cat? Maybe she knows that there's a file in there called file. Can she cat that out? She cannot. Can she access the public directory? She can list it, and she can get access to the file information. Okay, so let's clear this out. Let's exit the session for Sue, and let's do the same thing for Tom. Now Tom, as you remember, we didn't set any privileges at all on Tom. This is just right now a user on the system, and Tom doesn't belong to any group. So if you look at the groups for Tom, he just belongs to the Tom group. If he tries to switch into the Z files, he's going to get permission denied. That shows that he has got to belong to at least to the public group to get access to that. So we're going to exit here because only a Ubuntu user could add that group to Tom. So we're going to sudo user mod -a-g. We're going to add public, which is the only group that we're going to add, and we're going to add that to the Tom user. Let's clear all this out, and let's start a session as Tom again. At this point, if I type in groups, I can see that Tom belongs to Tom and then public. Let's go ahead and switch over to that directory. Tom has access to the Z files directory. He can list everything in there. Can he list in the leads? He cannot. Can he cat that leads / file? He cannot. Can he list owners? He cannot. Can he cat owners file? No, he can't. Can he list what's in the public directory? He can. Can he cat out what's in the public directory? And yes, he can. So now Tom is all set up also. So this example, it's a bit complex, but we went through an example of where we've set up 3 directories. We have these different tiers of owner, leader, and public. We've set up 3 groups, and now we can add as many users to those groups as we want. As we expand our company and maybe there's another owner, and I can add another owner to the owners group, and they will have access to this owners directory. If I, at some point, hire new managers, we can add more leads. If we hire other people, we can add them to the public group. So we just add them to the groups, and that's how we manage access to these directories. So there's one more thing I want to show here, and it's a little bit of an issue, and we'll talk about why this is an issue. But I'm logged in as Tom still, and I want to switch over to the public directory because he has access to the public directory. And we're going to clear this out. Right now, if I list, there is one file in there. It is owned by root, and it belongs to the public group. Let's say Tom, as part of his job, he needs to create a file in here. So we're going to use nano, and we're going to create a Tom, something that Tom created right here. So we created this file called Tom created. Here is some content that Tom entered. All right, so that's Tom's file. If I list this out, the challenge that we're going to see here is that this file that Tom created exists. That's not the problem. But you can look over here. It's owned by Tom. That's okay. But it belongs to the group Tom. This may become a challenge later on if people try to access this. Ideally, everything that gets created in the public directory would belong to the public group. And there's a special setting that we can do to make this happen. And we'll talk about that in a second. But I'm just going to clean this Tom file up. We don't need this. And let's go ahead and exit this Tom session. Let's come over here and let's talk about these special permissions. And there are 3 of them. Set UID. And you can look here, if you set this using the U+S, then if it's set on a file, that allows the user to execute that file with the permission of the owner. So if it's owned by root and you set this special bit here, U+S on a file, then when you execute that file, even if you're not root, you're executing it as if you were the root user. So that's one special bit. We're not going to use that one. But here's a set group ID, GID. This is another special bit. When it's set on a directory, new files that are created within the directory inherit the group ownership, and that's what we want. So any new files, we want them to belong to that same group. And so we're going to end up setting this bit in a second. But then there's a final bit, the sticky bit here. And so if you set the sticky bit with this +T, and if it's set on a directory, then anything that's created in there can only be deleted by the owner itself. And so we're going to leave this off for now. That might be something you may want to do, but we're going to set this bit for sure. So let's come back on over here, and I'm at the Ubuntu user, and what we're going to do is we're going to modify recursively. We're going to add in this group ID bit. So we're doing this one right here. Change mod G+S, and it's going to be for all of the files. Everything in there, recursively, we're going to add this special bit that's set, and then anytime that someone creates a file, that new file is going to belong to the group. And so we're going to go ahead and let this run. And if I list out, you're going to see Z files now. And instead of RWX, you can see an S. So you can tell that that special bit has been set. So now that that's set, let's go ahead and run our experiment again. Let's go let Tom log back in here. And Tom is going to go ahead and switch into the Z files public directory. And Tom's going to do what he did before. He's going to create a file called Tom created. And he's going to enter some info. All right, so we're going to exit out, save it. And now I'm going to list. It was created by Tom. You can still see that. But it belongs to the public group. And so now everything that's going to be created in these directories is going to belong to the group that the directory has. So the directory is owned by public. And so everything that's created in here is going to be owned by that public group. Just like if, for example, Bob was going to log in and he would get into Z files and let's say the leads, and he could create a new file in here. Put some stuff in there, exit out, and if we list, you can see the same thing. Here's the file created by Bob, so the owner is Bob, but because this is in a directory that is owned by the leads group, that leads owns this file. Everybody who's in the leads can access this file. So that's a little bit about those special bits. They're not used that often. Most of the time we're setting RWX permissions, but every once in a while you have special cases where, like for example, when you create new files, you want the owner to be the same group that owns the directory. So you need to set the special bit, or you don't want anybody to be able to delete that file except for the person that created it. So now you want to set the +T bit or the sticky bit. So that wraps up this whole video on users and groups and special bits and all of that stuff. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you next time.